The enduring myth, why the dramatic fall of Rome still captivates us. For over 15 centuries, the fall of the Roman Empire has served as the Western world's premier cautionary tale, a grand and tragic opera of collapse that echoes through our history, literature, and political discourse. The image is seared into our collective consciousness. Hordes of barbarians in animal skins storming the gates, the eternal city sacked, the light of civilization extinguished, plunging Europe into 1,000 years of intellectual darkness. This narrative of a great civilization overrun by uncouth outsiders has been wielded for generations to explain everything from moral decay and political corruption to the perils of immigration and the fragility of empire. Yet this dramatic rendition, while compelling, is a profound oversimplification. The real story behind the fall of Rome is not one of a single catastrophic event, but a slow, complex, and multifaceted process of transformation that unfolded over centuries. It was not a sudden murder at the hands of barbarian assassins, but a long, drawn-out death by 1,000 cuts. A systemic failure where internal rot proved far more lethal than external pressure. The true fall of Rome was a colossal unraveling where the very institutions, economic systems, and environmental realities that had enabled its unprecedented success became the instruments of its eventual disintegration. The peak of power, understanding the immense scale of the Roman system at its zenith. To understand the fall, one must first appreciate the sheer scale and achievement of the Roman Empire at its zenith during the Pax Romana, 27 BC to 180 AD. It was not merely a political entity, but an integrated ecological and economic unit of staggering complexity. From the rain-soaked hills of Britannia to the arid deserts of Syria, a single political authority guaranteed safe passage for goods, ideas, and people. A common currency, the silver denarius, facilitated trade across thousands of miles. Complex networks of roads and safe sea lanes connected grain fields in Egypt and North Africa to the million-strong populace of Rome, and Spanish olive oil and Gallic wine to garrisons on the Rhine and Danube. This was globalization, ancient style. The Roman state was a leviathan, funding a massive professional army, a vast bureaucracy, and the infamous bread and circuses that kept the urban populace pacified. This system, however, was incredibly expensive and required a constant and expanding source of revenue to function. The empire's stability was predicated on continuous conquest, which provided plunder, slaves, and new taxable territories. Once the borders solidified and the engine of expansion stalled in the 2nd century AD, the inherent structural weaknesses began to surface.
The first cracks, the 3rd century crisis, and the army's toxic grip. The first and most critical of these internal cancers was the crisis of the 3rd century, 235 to 284 AD, a 50-year period of such profound chaos that it is a miracle the empire survived it all. This was not the work of barbarians, but of Romans themselves. The army, once the guarantor of imperial stability, became its greatest destabilizing force. The secret of imperial power was no longer senatorial approval or divine right, but the loyalty of the legions. This reality spawned the Barracks Emperors, a rapid and bloody succession of military commanders proclaimed by their troops only to be murdered and replaced by the next ambitious general. Dozens of men claimed the purple in this period, their reigns measured in months. This perpetual civil war bled the empire white, diverting military focus from the frontiers and allowing external threats to fester. The economic consequences were catastrophic. To buy the loyalty of the army, emperors debased the silver currency, steadily reducing the precious metal content until trust in the coinage evaporated. This triggered hyperinflation, a phenomenon documented by the Edict on Maximum Prices issued by Emperor Diocletian in 301 AD, a desperate and futile attempt to command economic reality. the economy began to regress to a barter system, crippling long-distance trade and the complex tax structure that funded the state. Currency collapse and economic chaos, when Roman coin became worthless. It was in response to this near-death experience that emperors Diocletian and Constantine attempted to save the empire by fundamentally restructuring it. Their reforms, while providing a temporary reprieve, ultimately created a more rigid and arguably more fragile system. Diocletian's tetrarchy, rule of four, was an administrative division of the empire into eastern and western halves, each with a senior and junior emperor. This was intended to end civil war and provide better defense, but it institutionalized a division that would never truly heal. He also bound citizens to their professions, making farmers, soldiers, and craftsmen's roles hereditary in an effort to freeze the social order and ensure a steady supply of food and troops. Constantine, meanwhile, legalized Christianity and founded a new capital at Constantinople, strategically shifting the empire's center of gravity eastward. While these measures restored a century of stability, they came at a cost. The empire was now effectively two entities, with the richer, more urbanized, and more defensible East increasingly the senior partner. The Western Empire, with its longer, more porous river frontiers, the Rhine and Danube, and less developed economy, became more vulnerable. The state had become an oppressive, top-heavy bureaucracy, stifling economic initiative and social mobility to maintain its own existence.
The desperate reforms, how Diocletian and Constantine rigidified the empire. This leads to the second great internal failure, the crushing weight of the Roman state itself. By the late empire, the tax burden on the average citizen, particularly the landowning curio class, was immense and often ruinous. The imperial bureaucracy was a labyrinthine and corrupt machine, and the army, now bloated to over 500,000 men, was an insatiable financial drain. For many small farmers and landowners, the choice was stark: face financial extinction or seek the protection of a powerful local magnate. They would surrender their land to a wealthy senator and become tenant farmers, coloni, in exchange for protection from the tax collector and a measure of security. This practice, known as patronage, eroded the traditional tax base of the state and the social structure of the towns. It created a proto-feudal system where loyalty was local and personal, not imperial and abstract. The powerful senatorial class in the West, ensconced on their vast self-sufficient latifundia, estates, often viewed the imperial government not as a protector, but as a predator to be resisted. They hoarded their wealth, raised their own private armies, and felt little connection to the distant emperor in Ravenna. The Western capital moved from Rome for defensive reasons. The Roman state was, in effect, hollowing itself out from within, as its most affluent citizens opted out of the system that was meant to protect them. The hollowed-out state: taxation, corruption, and the flight to the manors. It is against this backdrop of profound internal weakness that the role of the so-called barbarians must be re-examined. The Germanic tribes that crossed the frontiers in the 4th and 5th centuries were not a unified alien force seeking to destroy Rome. They were often desperate, displaced peoples themselves, fleeing from the terrifying advance of the Huns, a nomadic confederation from the steppes of Central Asia. More importantly, the relationship between Romans and Germans was not of simple antagonism. For centuries, there had been a steady, peaceful migration and integration of Germanic peoples into the empire, as farmers, soldiers, and even slaves. By the late 4th century, the Roman army was utterly dependent on Germanic recruits, who often rose to the highest ranks of command. The Visigoths, who famously defeated the Eastern Roman Emperor Valens at the Battle of Adrianople in 378, were not external invaders. They were a people who had been granted asylum within the empire's borders, only to be so brutally exploited and mistreated by corrupt Roman officials that they revolted. This battle, a catastrophic Roman defeat that saw the emperor himself killed, demonstrated not just barbarian strength, but Roman failure and the effectiveness of Germanic warriors, many of whom had learned their trade in the Roman army itself. Reassessing the barbarian, migrants, mercenaries, and men of Rome. The invasions of the 5th century were, in reality, often complex negotiations and power struggles involving these semi-Romanized Germanic groups within the empire's borders. The Visigoths, who sacked Rome in 410 under Alaric, were not mindless Vandals. They were a foederati, allied people, led by a former Roman general demanding a permanent homeland and a recognized place within the Roman system. They did not seek to burn the city to the ground. They spared its Christian churches, but to use it as a bargaining chip. Similarly, the final act in the West in 476, when the Germanic general Odoacer deposed the child emperor Romulus Augustulus, was less a conquest and more a bureaucratic change. Odoacer did not declare an end to the Roman Empire. He simply sent the imperial insignia to the Eastern Emperor in Constantinople, declaring that the West no longer needed a separate emperor and that he would rule Italy as the Eastern Emperor's representative. The population of Italy likely noticed little immediate change. Roman administration, law, and culture persisted. The fall was, in this light, a political transfer of power, the final admission that the Western imperial office had become redundant, its functions usurped by Germanic military strongmen who now controlled the real levers of power. A battle that exposed the empire's fatal flaws. Compounding these political and economic crises were forces beyond human control. Modern scientific evidence, from ice core samples to tree ring data, dendrochronology, points to a period of significant climatic instability in the late Roman period. A period of cooling in the 5th and 6th centuries, possibly linked to a grand solar minimum, led to shorter growing seasons, failed harvests, and famine. The Justinianic plague of the 6th century, which originated in the Eastern Empire but had devastating reverberations in the West, killed tens of millions, perhaps as much as a quarter of the population of the Mediterranean world. This catastrophic depopulation shattered what remained of the complex Roman economy, decimated the tax base, and made it impossible to recruit and maintain large armies. While these events peaked after the traditional fall date of 476, they finished off any chance of a Roman revival in the West and hammered the final nails into the coffin of the ancient world's demographic and economic structures. Political theater and the anticlimactic end in 476. Therefore, the story of Rome's fall is not a simple morality play about barbarism triumphing over civilization. It is a sobering lesson in systemic collapse. The Western Roman Empire did not fall because it grew weak and then was invaded. It was invaded successfully because it had already grown weak from within. The causes were synergistic: a paralyzing political instability, a bankrupt and inflationary economy, an oppressive and alienating tax structure, a crippling reliance on foreign mercenaries, a shifting climate, and devastating disease. The Germanic peoples were not the cause of the disease, but the opportunistic infection that entered a body whose immune system, the Roman legions, the treasury, the political will, had already failed. They were as much a symptom of the empire's decline as its cause, and in many cases, they were trying to become a part of Rome, not to destroy it. Why Rome's true fall was a transformation, not an apocalypse. The legacy of Rome did not vanish in 476. It continued robustly in the Byzantine Empire in the East for another 1,000 years. In the West, its ghost lingered in the Latin language, in the administrative structures of the Catholic Church, which stepped into the power vacuum, in Roman law, and in the enduring dream of a unified res publica. The Dark Ages were not an absolute void, but a period of fragmentation and synthesis where Roman, Christian, and Germanic traditions slowly coalesced into the new cultures of medieval Europe. The real story of the fall of Rome teaches us that civilizations are not murdered. They can, however, unravel. Their collapse is rarely a single-event drama, but a slow-moving tragedy, a failure to adapt where the very solutions to one crisis, be it debasing the currency, dividing the empire, or relying on foreign troops, become the seeds of the next greater catastrophe. It is a story not of a light being switched off, but of a complex machine worn down by friction, poor maintenance, and overload, gradually grinding to a final, irrevocable